Welcome to this edition of the Purity Post, a short video blog to help you understand and apply biblical truth regarding sexuality. My name is Jonathan Daugherty and I'm the director of Be Broken Ministries, a national outreach whose mission is healing sexual brokenness by God's grace, one story at a time. This post is the second in a three-part series on masturbation. Today we are going to try and answer the question, is it a sin? This is probably the most commonly asked question we receive regarding masturbation, and I wish it were a super simple one to answer. But it actually requires a little more investigation than just turning to a single verse in the Bible. After all, there isn't an 11th commandment that says, "Thou shalt not masturbate." Now, before we dive in, let me just define masturbation so we can all be on the same page. Masturbation is simply sexual self-stimulation, usually resulting in orgasm. That's it. Now, just because the Bible doesn't mention the act of masturbation specifically, doesn't mean it has nothing to say about it. The Bible has a lot to say about sexuality, and because masturbation involves a person's sexuality, there are some connections that can be made. I want to highlight three biblical principles regarding sexuality that might shed some light on whether or not masturbation is a moral or immoral act. First, the Bible connects sexuality with God's holiness. In Leviticus chapter 18, God is giving instructions to Moses about how his people are to manage their sexuality. 6 times in that one chapter, God says, "I am the Lord." It's as if God is wanting his people to know that how they conduct themselves sexually is a reflection of the very holiness of God. He doesn't want his people defiling themselves or profaning God's name by misusing their sexuality. He instructs them to not be sexual with a close relative and not to have sex with your sister or mother or daughter and much more. So we have to ask ourselves if our act of masturbation is reflecting the holiness of God or not. A hard question to answer, but still we need to wrestle with it. The second biblical principle of sexuality has to do with what a person is thinking, not merely what they are doing. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, 27 and 28, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." What was Jesus addressing here? Actions or thoughts? He was talking about what's going on in our minds. We like to think that the lines of morality are all drawn outside our heads, that our righteousness is only connected to our behaviors. So we look at what we've done or not done and declare, "I'm in the right." But God looks beyond behavior and stares into our hearts. Where are our thoughts focused? Even if we haven't committed a sexual sin in our behavior, Jesus said if we think lustful thoughts, we've already crossed that moral line. Regarding masturbation, can you engage in that activity without your mind crossing over into lustful thinking? I never have. The Bible is clear that engaging in lustful thinking is sin. So if masturbating while thinking lustful thoughts, at best you're making masturbation an accomplice to sin. Finally, a significant biblical principle of sexuality to look at when trying to understand masturbation is God's original design for sexuality. Now, we touched on this in a previous Purity post, but I want to highlight it again here for the specific purpose of pointing out that God's original purpose for sexuality was never self-focused, which is directly opposite of masturbation's focus. After God made Adam and placed him in the garden, he said in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him," or suitable for him. Adam was fully sexual when God made this statement, but God declared it not good. Man wasn't intended to use his sexuality alone. He needed a woman, someone he could share his sexuality with. Masturbation was never part of God's intention for sexual expression. So, is masturbation a sin? In most every case, I would say yes because of what the Bible has to say about sexuality, its connection to God's holiness, what's going on in our minds, and how God originally designed sexuality to be relational. But I do believe there can be instances where it is not considered an immoral act. For instance, if an 8 or 9-year-old boy has an erection and touches himself, discovering the pleasurable sensation of his body's natural sexuality, without the sinful influence of lustful thoughts, I don't believe God condemns that as sin. And this is why I believe the Bible does not come out and say masturbation is a sin, because there are these very small windows of sexual discovery where immorality is not at issue. But these are very small windows. See, I believe God values our sexuality and wants us to share the same high regard for it. It's a treasure meant for full expression in the covenant bond of marriage. When we cheapen it through self-centered or lustful outbursts such as masturbation, we miss the beauty, the wonder, the true pleasure of intimacy God intended. Let us not see how close we can get to the line of morality, but rather see how deeply we can dive into the principles God clearly outlines in Scripture. This will bring deep satisfaction, and questions like, is masturbation a sin, will fade away completely. Thanks for watching this edition of the Purity Post. If you'd like more resources, please visit BeBroken.com or call our toll-free number at 1-800-49-PURITY. Keep pressing on.